Welcome, everyone. Here is the Scott Snyder.
Hey!
We're going to mic you up real quick.
Yeah, sure.
I didn't know you were going to come in here with
I didn't know that
big
either,
old beer.
but I'm happy.
Yeah. You don't have right Dark Knight's metal and then come in with a water.
Exactly. Right? In Mexico, Greg and I went to a con, and a fan brought us homebrewed beer that was all designed to look like the different Dark Knights of metal. So each bottle had like their symbol on it and all of this, and the beer was so good. It was terrible because I was like, I don't want to drink it because I want to save it, but it was too good, so we drank it.
Yeah.
And we had just empty bottles, Dark Knights.
That's pretty cool.
Speaking of that, there's something after, I believe, the last night that you and Greg are going to work on. What is that?
Yeah, see, all right, we're already into spoilers.
Are you allowed to talk about it, or?
No, but it's okay. We're like far away from the office, so I already got into trouble. I feel like at my line, I was like, "And next, don't tell anybody." But it's like talking about everything. But so right now, Greg and I are working on Last Night on Earth, which is our last Batman story. We're really proud. Thank you. We're really proud of it. It's a story that I thought of back when we were doing 0 Year. So it's been around a long time. It was basically, when I started on Batman, I was so terrified because I was sure that I would never get on Batman. I mean, I came to DC, it was my dream to write and draw comics. But when I got to DC and I finally broke in, I was just doing the backup on Detective. And I was only supposed to do a few issues. And then Paul Dini, who was doing the feature and some of the backup stuff, left to do another project, and they didn't know what to do, so they were just like, do you want to take the whole thing and do backups and features? And I was like, yes, I do, even though the next day I was so scared. I remember telling my wife, like, maybe I'll just call in sick for the whole year. But so I had done Black Mirror, which was a lot of fun because it was Dick Grayson, and Dick Grayson like wears his heart on his sleeve, so the fact that he's always scared and excited to be Batman was great for me because I was scared and excited to write Batman, so we got along great, you know. And then Bruce came along back with Court of Owls, and I was really terrified to do it. And at that point, while I was writing that, I bumped into Grant Morrison at San Diego Comic-Con, and he was sort of like, what's the matter? And I won't do his accent because it always sounds all wrong. I used to think I was really good at it, and then someone was like, are you doing a Jamaican accent? And I was like, it's Scottish. It's Scottish. But he was great, and he's been a real mentor in different ways that when I've seen him periodically, and especially with metal, but he told me at that time, he said, if you really want to feel comfortable on Batman, you have to have a death and a origin story for your version. So the first thing I did was 0 Year, because that was DC really wanted a new origin for the New 52, and a lot of the things they kept telling me, they were like, you know, the original origin Year One won't work anymore because Selina has a different origin, Jim Gordon has a different origin, so you have to do one. And so 0 Year was my favorite thing that we did on the book at that time, where it was really written for my kids, you know, about all the things that I was afraid of for them, Batman sort of facing those things in comic book language, like, you know, random violence and terrorism and all those kinds of, but it's like coded as, you know, the Riddlers, the terror. Anyway, the point is, Last Night came about back then when I was thinking about what's the death of our Batman or the end of our Batman. So I've been waiting to do it a long, long time. And I thought about doing it with Sean Murphy. We talked about it back then in 2014, 2015, and we were going to do it, but then Greg left to do stuff with Mark Millar, and Sean started doing his own Batman, and he actually came back and started doing designs for Last Night, and I was like, your Batman is so good and so your own, it doesn't make any sense for you to do this. Greg should do it. And it was his suggestion too. So anyway, point is, Last Night, we're finishing that now. It really is kind of the last thing we have to say about Batman. I'm really, really deeply attached to it and love it. I hope you guys like it. I'm really nervous about it. And then afterwards, Greg and I are doing one more really big project for DC, I think, assuming it's approved. I handed in the outline, and it takes all the pieces of the stuff that we've been doing since Metal and levels them up. You know, for me, what I don't want to do, and I want to make this really clear, is I know there's a lot of anxiety, I think, among fans about, are you going to reboot? Are you going to do things that change things? And, you know, we've never been about that. Even when we did Batman, we tried to keep a lot of the continuity there and that stuff, and DC's been really supportive of that. So the plan from us and from the company, you what we're working with is not some kind of scary reboot thing. Like I wouldn't do that to you guys, and honestly, they wouldn't either. They're not looking to be like, we're starting all over at number one, screw everything that we just built. So don't worry about it. The real goal, or the post-it that I have on my computer, honestly, and the thing I'm trying to do, it just says everything matters. And my goal from 2017 to now, when I did metal, my deal with DC was that if I did metal and it went over well, and there was a real concern, like what if it doesn't? What if everyone hates it? But if it goes over well, what I'd like to do post that is to try and connect a lot of the stories we've done from Crisis on Infinite Earths through Doomsday Clock to now, and be able to say everything you've read matters and makes sense in one meta-narrative. So the thing I'm working on with Greg, without going into too much detail, is that kind of a story that says everything you've read matters, and the things that you don't think go together or you might think are siloed actually are part of one plan, because they were designed to be part of one plan. But it's hard because timing happens and life happens and things fall out of whack, like my stuff, with things and all of it. So the idea is to try and bring it back together and do a story that really shows you that everything in DC from the 80s to now is part of one story that will culminate in something special. But they might reject it. in which case we'll go do something else. I don't know what we'll do.
I doubt they'll reject you. Well, when you talked about it was your dream to come to DC, you made a big splash. People talk about your Batman because it's amazing, but your run on Swamp Thing was pretty epic. How was it like writing that?
That was terrifying. I remember Jeff Lemire is like one of my best friends, and he was doing Animal Man when I was doing Swamp Thing. And he was really terrified of doing that because he was a huge Grant fan, and I'm a huge Grant and Alan Moore fan, and we were both really scared. And we just sort of made this deal that we'd try and honor what the books were about. The weird thing about a book like that is that Swamp Thing demands that you take it and do something brand new. Like everyone that's done the book has made it their own, and the challenge of it is almost to reject what came before or use it, build on it, not reject it, but use it to spin it in a new direction, which is what Alan Moore did to, Len Wein and Bernie Wrightson. And then I think, Steve Bissett afterwards and Josh Dysart and all the people that wrote it after tried to do. So it almost says you have to take it and do something your own. So there was a freedom in that, but there was also terror in that. I can tell you like that, doing that and Batman, because when I did Batman, they didn't tell me it was going to be number one until way after I started writing it. So I started writing it thinking it was going to be like, 790, whatever it was, or, and then one day Jim Lee was like, yeah, and by the way, whenever he calls and it says Jim Lee on your phone, it's the freakiest thing in the world, where you're like, you can't, that's someone is pranking me, or it's a different Jim Lee. But he was like, I just want you to know, just so you know, like we're starting over the numbering, and so it's going to be Batman number one, and, yes, don't worry, it's the first time in 70 years, whatever, and you're like, and I swear I was like panic attack, nonstop. And I remember Greg was too, even though he's like, he doesn't, he's like on the outside much tougher than me with all that. He would never admit it, but we were both freaking out. So to do Swamp Thing at the same time you're doing Batman, and then to realize that they're both number ones, like it was the scariest moment of my whole life, like scarier than having kids. You know what I mean? Where I was just like, I did not know these things were going to be like this, this kind of, freighted with expectation and started over that way. So it was really scary. I had like genuine like panic attacks about it. So the only way I was through it, my wife was like, pretend that you're just writing fan fiction. Like pretend you're writing it for yourself and no one's going to read it. And that was really the only way I could do it, was to be like, this isn't real. I'm just writing Swamp Thing like I used to in my notebook. You know what I mean? And no one's reading this. Somebody's drawing it, but who knows? And that's it. So it was the only way to get through it.
So when you were doing both of these number ones at the same time, which I think both of them are pretty crazy, and number one for the Batman, for some good money. So if anyone wants to give me theirs, was it harder to write the Court of Owls, which they put into Gotham? And I was like, oh, that's been around for 30 years. No, it just happened. Or the Council in Swamp Thing.
They were both, I mean, the idea was to try and do things that felt additive to the mythology without feeling intrusive. You know, that's always the goal, is to make something that feels like it's always been there, but that's new. And I had really enjoyed that with James Jr. and Black Mirror. So the idea was to try and hide things in the history of the character that would honor what came before and give me a chance to revisit those stories. And at the same time, with Swamp Thing in particular, with Abby and, you know, with Batman, also to revisit the history of Gotham, and then to sort of insert these things without it feeling like a complete aberration from the history. So that was my goal, was to just be able to say, I love the history of these characters, the mythos of these characters, and I just want to add something new. Don't hate me for that, you know? But the thing I'd say, and I hope this is true, like because we had tremendous fights with DC also, which is, you know, I don't talk about often, but for me, the goal was to make I thought I was going to get kicked off. I mean, I was sure I was going to get fired after 12 issues. Like, I didn't think they'd even give me 12 issues. I thought at 10 they'd say, like, you're out or whatever, because who knows how the sales were going to go. At that time, doing a commitment and saying, this is a brand new writer, you guys probably don't know who I am, a 12-issue story that lasts a year. Most stories at that time were 3 issues, 6 issues. You know, it's a lot to ask of you guys to say you're going to read a whole year's worth from this nobody. So I was ready to just, you know, fall on my sword and get, you know, fired. But I thought it was the only chance I had to write Batman. And so Grant had told me too, and, you know, you got to write it like it's the only chance you ever get. And that's what I tell my students all the time, is that you have to write every arc as though it's the only chance you ever will get to write this character, hands down, no matter if you've done it 10 times or 1 time. Because there's thousands of other creators and people out there in the world who would kill you to write that character because they have something that matters to them to say about him or her. And if you don't treat it that way, you're disrespecting it. So for me, I get sometimes people will say, why don't you do like smaller stories or like, you know, more decompressed stuff? But I just am not built that way, because I genuinely feel as though you get Batman is like the Super Bowl, or, you know, the World Series, and if you don't get up, all my sports analogies like fall apart, so just forgive me. I'm always like, if you don't kick that home run, you know, but no, like if you don't get up and really swing for the fence, I mean, there's no point. You know, you might as well let somebody else do it if you play it safe. And the thing I'd say is, at this point, honestly, you know, I've done enough Batman that, and there's a lot left I really wish I could do. I have a Scarecrow story, and I have a new villain in my head, and I have a lot I'd like to do. But I know that it would be playing it safe. It's like, I know how to write Batman, and I know what buttons I like to push, and I know I could be on there another 5 years and be happy. But if I don't challenge myself as a writer to do other things, there's no point. So ultimately, I mean, when you go back to, you know, the question of, you know, what was it like and all that stuff, and how do you insert things that feel like they were there, it's a matter of making it personal. And so if there's any aspiring writers out there, I'd tell you this, like, or artists, these characters, there's no original story that you can tell, honestly, with Batman or Superman or Wonder Woman, or, I mean, you can, but, you know, for the most part, it's, you know, Court of Owls is a secret society, which is granted that with, you know, the Black Glove, which was also something that was done earlier with, you know, there's many, you know, with Dark Knight, Dark City, there's lots of variations on those themes. The reason I did Court of Owls the way I did was because, you know, 10 years ago, I was married and I was having a kid, and my friends weren't doing those things yet. And I came back to the city and visited my parents in New York, and everything in my old neighborhood was different than I remember. All the stores, everything was gone. All the people I knew were gone. And I remember I had just got hired for the job. I'd just been to the DC offices on 53rd Street and Broadway, and Mike Martz, the DC editor, had been like, you get Batman. I didn't know it was #1, but he's like, you get Batman. And I was in this, do you want to do it? It's with Bruce Wayne. And I was in this room, this conference room, and there was a Batman pinball machine, Batman, '89. I remember it blinking and like looking at me, you know what I mean? And I was like, oh God, all right, I'm going to do it. And I was walking around, I remember thinking like my old neighborhood is so different than what it was. And that was the genesis of the Court of Owls, was this feeling of displacement and feeling like, you know, if Batman knows Gotham City and he takes everything he knows about his identity from the idea that he knows it better than anyone, and then it changes every 5 years to new people that live there, new stores, then he won't know it then. And he didn't know it 20 years ago and 100 years ago, and he won't know it 5 years from now. And there's a humility in that and a necessity of accepting your own smallness and that you'll never solve certain mysteries. And that's what I felt. And with Death of the Family, we were pregnant with Emmett, my second kid. And it was, you know, Joker saying to Batman, you don't really want to be a father again. You don't really want to be a family man. You want to go back and be like me, with me. You know, you want to go back and be younger and this is slowing you down. This is making you mortal. And with Endgame, it was written because, sorry, I'm like totally down a corn maze, like rabbit hole, but.
We're riding with you.
All right, well, with Zero Year, for example, that was when my son, he went to school, DC was pressuring us to do an origin, and my older son, Jack, he was only in like 3rd or 4th grade at the time, and they had a shooter drill at his school. And he was in the hallway getting water, and they didn't realize, so he got locked in the hallway for a minute. And from that day forward, he wouldn't go to school without a thermos because he was terrified of going to the water fountain, you know? And I realized, I'm like, my kids have very different fears than me. When I was growing up in the 80s in the city, Frank Miller spoke to my fears. You know, year one was the urban decay and the gangs, and the Cold War was in Dark Knight Returns, and all that stuff was in the primordial soup of his writing of Batman. So what if I did an origin that spoke to the things that I'm scared of for my kids, you know, and that's what Zero Year was supposed to be. So the point I'm trying to make in this long, circuitous way is that the only way you make it feel like it's organic, whether it's inserting things into the past or just doing the character in the first place, is to make it personal. The reason these heroes have power, in my opinion, is because you connect to them because they make you brave in the face of your fears. You know what I mean? Batman is there to say no matter what you're facing in your life, you get up and you use it as fuel to make sure that's not going to happen again, period. And if you don't, you know, use your own vulnerabilities and anxieties and nightmares for that, it won't be original. If you just plot it, well, it would be cool to see Riddler fighting Batman. Well, it would be cool to do this. Those stories in the end feel hollow to me. The ones I connect with and love are the ones that are clearly written from a place of openness. And that's what I've tried to do with Batman and Swamp Thing. The reason I feel like hopefully some of this stuff feels organic to you guys is that, like, even right now, I mean, last night, the story we're doing, even though I came up with the idea a long time ago, is really about the same thing I'm trying to write about in Batman Who Laughs and Justice League, but all from different prismatic angles, which is, you know, when you look around the world now, regardless of what side you're on in the political spectrum, and you could be on any side, the cruelty and the negativity and the divisiveness that we seem to engage with each other, not just in social media, but in general, on every level, and the desire to isolate yourself from people that are going to challenge you with different beliefs or anything, is so prevalent and so encouraged by leaders right and left. And isolationism on all of these fronts, whether it's a very intimate personal isolationism or a macro level, to me is everywhere. That last night is about that. It's about Lex Luthor saying, you don't want heroes. You don't want the difficulty of trying to be good. Why don't you just be bad and get your life in a place where you're happy every day with the little satisfactions, and screw everybody else, because who cares? You know, we're your real heroes, the villains, and that's what our nature is deep down, so why not? And so that's Justice League and Batman Who Laughs as well, and different angles on that idea. So what I'm trying to say is, if you want to write comics, in my opinion, the only way to do it with characters that are 80 years old, 70 years old, 75 years old, is to be able to put your own fears on the page and say, what am I afraid of for my children or myself? What am I afraid about what am I afraid I am deep down? Am I a bad person because of this? You know, is the world this way? Am I terrified of this? And if you don't do that, it will never be original. But it's scary because you have to open yourself up to be like, does anyone feel the way I feel about these things? So that's how you go about, in my opinion, creating something that hopefully feels organically inserted into the mythos, because the great, in my opinion, writers on all these characters did that. You know, when you read the stories that affected you, and you look at the writers and artists' work across different books, you see they were thinking about those things in multiple platforms. Do you know what I mean? It was stuff that really mattered to them. So I hope that answers. That was the longest answer in the history of answers. But anyway.
Well, this is probably a harder and longer answer, but so all the superhero stuff that you've come out with lately is home runs, grand slams. So American Vampire, which is like, you do really good with horror, and Dark Knight's Metal was kind of horrific. Would you want to do something that's your own creation that you can really just get down and dirty with again?
Yeah, well, I am. Like, I'm looking, without giving too much away, I've been pretty open as much as I can be on social media too, that I've been focusing a lot on creator owned. So I have like 3 or 4 books that I'm trying to put together, or I am putting together. We're going to announce some of them pretty soon. And they're all really personal. I mean, I've always felt like I need the balance of doing things that are creator owned with doing the kind of big DC stuff. The challenge of the DC stuff is that, like I said, it's about making something personal within the cipher of these characters that everybody knows and loves. So you're trying to say to people, I know you already love Batman, like, I have something to say through this character, hope you like it. Creator owned is like, I know you kind of are okay with me, like you're going to come over and look at it because I'm doing the book, but I have to build the whole world, like build Batman and the mythos for you. So they're inverted muscles, like it's a total inverted project, you know what I mean? So I've always loved doing both at the same time. And right now, because what Greg and I are working on for DC is so, it's just so big, you know, doing a story where it's kind of the history of the DCU mattering in a way that makes you guys feel rewarded for being fans and reading, because that's my goal. Like, that's the goal, is to make you feel like what you've read over the last few years, but even the last like 10 to 30 years matters now, like that it's all active and energized and important. That task is so hard that it's made me do more indie stuff on the side, because it gives me a treehouse to go do all kinds of stuff. So I'm working on a few projects. I'm working on one with Francesco Francavilla, which I've sort of teased, that's about classic horror movies and a guy who finds the remnants of a classic horror movie who he believes is supposed to be as good as like Bride of Frankenstein and all of that. And he tracks down the director, who's still alive, and he goes to him and he's like, I found the remnants of this movie that was burned up in the studio fire. What happened? And he's like, oh, it's simple. The monster in the movie is real, and he's here in this building, and he's going to kill us tonight. And that's the beginning, and it intercuts between like black and white movie footage that Francesco drew and the color interview between this guy and the main character and the director, who's like 100 years old in this hospice. And his son is with him, the main character, and as he's waiting for his dad to finish, like looking at his phone, all the old people start acting really weird in the hospice. It's really fun. It's super creepy. That one I'm working on, and then I'm working on one with, I'm not supposed to say, so I won't, but I'm working on two other ones. I'm working on 2 other ones, one with a DC artist who I work with quite a bit, and then one with a guy who I've never worked with, but I'm good friends with, and then Greg and I talk a lot. We have a couple creator-owned projects we really want to do. So he wants to finish the Creech, which we're gonna do.
Awesome.
But also, yeah, he has the whole.
I'm a huge fan of the Creech.
Yeah, he has the whole ending planned out. But we also have 2 creator-owned projects that we've been talking about a long time. So I kind of see it as almost like the biggest DC stuff I've done, but I need to balance it with the most and biggest creator-owned stuff, like Undiscovered Country, and then my own stuff that I'm doing solo also. So I'm doing another thing with Jock in addition to Witches. And we're bringing back American Vampire in 2020 for the anniversary. It's the 10th anniversary, which I can't believe. But we're bringing that back. It takes place in 1976. I'm spoiling everything. And Travis, if you've read the series, he's one of my favorite characters. He's like a big vampire hunter. He's like a stuntman in Vegas, like Evel Knievel. And Pearl is hunting Skinner, who's disappeared off the map. And it's a lot of fun. It's all planned out and basically written. So we're gonna start it in January, and then hopefully it'll come out in the summer or the fall, because we're doing it as a volume of like 8 issues at once.
Are all of these going to be on Image or different spots?
Different spots. I'm still figuring it out, but what I wanted to do. It was basically like, I guess it was around November. We were pregnant with Quinn, who's now 5 months old. So I was like on the plane today, and I was just like, this plane is so quiet. Like, what? I could go to sleep. Like, what is this quiet? But we were pregnant, and it was like, you know what? If I'm going to start digging into this bigger DC stuff, I need to create a bunch of my own things at once. And I went on this like crazy tear, and I started doing all these ideas I had wanted to do, like this idea, Evil, which is, I'm spoiling it, but it's like, what if tomorrow 99% of the world's population is born psychopaths, and then it takes place like after that happens. It's a lot of fun, that one. It's
Interesting.
very cheerful. But then the one with Francesco, and there's Francis one, and there's a lot, sci-fi one, a lot, like just boom, 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 just nonstop. And I just went on this tear and started writing all of it, and just wrote most of each of those books in the course of a couple of months. It was like, 6-issue, 8-issue arcs, just sitting there writing the outline and then just doing it. And we were building this writing studio on our property, which, again, because we were having the baby, I was like, we need to build something that's like a box. We built this place for me to go write. And so right now it's really a weird schizophrenic feeling where I feel like I'm building the most indie stuff I've ever done and the biggest indie stuff, and at the same time building the biggest DC stuff. And I do have an idea of doing a couple things at DC indie as well, but I also have a lot of things that I think might be better served, or at least a handful of things that would be better served to do in more independent ways as well. So my hope is to balance all of it and do some stuff with DC that I think would fit there, and be the kind of stuff that they would really respond to, and then do stuff on my own that's really free of it. And they seem to understand. I mean, I remember the first time when I did Witches, and I went to Jim and Dan, and I was just like, I work here every day. I just need a country house, you know what I mean? Or like a place on the weekends. I go like a cabin, not like a country house. I don't know what that is. Like meaning like a cabin, or just some place I go myself. And they're like, well, we could have a cabin here. You can go. I'm like, I don't need a cabin with you guys in it. You know what I mean? Like, I need to get away from you. No offense, just to have a place to go where I'm not overseen by the same people. Mm-hmm. So that's where I am right now. Is I feel really excited. I feel the stuff. I believe in the stuff I'm doing for DC, and I believe in the stuff I'm doing for myself. And some of it might wind up at DC, and I think quite a bit of it will wind up at Image, and we'll just see how it goes. You know what I mean? I'm just playing it by ear. I just decided to make all of it without even knowing where the hell it's going to go. So that's and then ask the artist. Be like, where do you want to go? You want to crowdfund it? You want to go to Image? You want to go to DC? But just make things that you love. Like, make things you care about. I'm doing one that's like about a mine in the 1890s, and all these people died in this mine collapse, and then all of a sudden they're suddenly seem to be alive in a detritus, and they're pulled out, and it's a Western horror, and I love it. And it's just like, it's about things that matter to me, and I just want to do it and not worry about where it's going to go and how much money I'm going to make, or
just
any
have
of
fun
it.
with it.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Like, I feel like that's the goal of coming here as well, and being here, is that, sorry if I'm talking too much, but like being at DC that long and being in charge of things like, a lot of the pieces right now with Justice League and with Metal and with New Justice and with You're the Villain and that, I love it. It's the dream. It's a dream. I love looking at it and being like, how do we do something with Dick or Wally, or how do we put these characters where we think they should be? It's great. But I also feel like that engenders a need on the other side to be like, how do I make things that are totally free of anything, that are just mine, you know? And it's that constant weird balance where the more I do one, the more I need to do the other. So I was just like, I'm making all of this, and I know it's impractical, but I don't care how much, I make from them or any of it. Undiscovered Country, I'm just going to do it myself and not worry about it. And if I lose money on it, then I'll just pay for it. I don't care. You know what I mean? And my wife's always like, it's because she's smarter than me and the business person as well. She's like a doctor, which is always funny because I'm like, she's like a real person that saves like real lives. And I'm always like, I've saved millions of fictional lives today. You don't even know. And then I go to these doctor parties where she has all of her colleagues and they all want to know about comics all the time, which is so funny. You'll be talking to a cardiologist and he'll be like, but how does the vampire heart in American Vampire? And I'm like, well, sir, it has 5 chambers, and I'm just like making shit up as you go. And you're like, you know what I mean? Where you're like, well, doctor, like, exactly.
Let me break it down to simple terms for you, doctor.
I know, exactly. I'm like, again, well, if we have to go over it again, but,
So if we may, Undiscovered Country is coming out next month.
Yeah, November 6th.
Can we have a little peek behind the curtain? Or the wall, I should say, since it's going to be a massive wall.
Yeah, sure. Well, so Charles Sewell and I have been friends for a while. We became friends when I handed Swamp Thing to him in like 2012 or 13. And we just got along. And he had a daughter who's my older son's age, and we just got together with our wives and our kids and when we were doing this, and the kids got along great. And so we started hanging out, and we started going for runs together at cons, because it was my way of like getting my head out of the space of what do I have to do at this con to promote XYZ. And this is a while ago. Like now I'm much more loose about it, where I feel like I go to a con to just enjoy it and connect with fans. But at that time, when you're building a career, a lot of it is also like you are there for that, but you're there also to promote stuff that you think is gonna help you. So what interviews do I need to do? What retailers do I need to speak to? So we would go for these runs that like just got us our heads out of the game. And so we became quite close, and we started talking about doing something together. And it was a few years ago that we came up with this idea for Undiscovered Country, which he was doing research for Daredevil, and I was doing stuff for Batman. And I had met somebody, and then we both became friends with him, who was in the CIA. He's older. He's like, it's not Tom King. He was like, in his late 50s, early 60s, and he had done all this work with this development of this project, or this kind of thought experiment that they had about different levels of extricating America from the world economically, in terms of building of materials. So like the threat is that you build materials for military things, and you have parts that are made in places where they might put bugs in them or whatever it is. So they were wargaming a lot of how far can you pull America out of the world economy without disrupting things. You create a Bitcoin that's American currency, all this different stuff. And so he invited us, and we had this idea for Undiscovered Country before this, and then we were talking to him, and he was like, that's what I do. Why don't you come down to the CIA and DARPA and talk to my people about it? And it was amazing. We went down to the CIA a couple of years ago. It was so crazy. I had to like find a suit. I don't even have a suit, you know what I mean? I was like a wedding funeral suit, all black. You go there and we go around the CIA, and they're like, this is the umbrella of this Russian spy that was called the something, and he has like a needle at the end that comes out, and they're like, look, and it's like, and he would like poison people. And they had it was crazy. I mean, it was like they had like a wooden fish thing that they put in the water to secretly test if chemical weapons. It was nuts. But the thing you walk away with the most is this sense of sacrifice and service to an idea of what America is supposed to be, regardless of where it is, like in its, where it is in its current state at different moments. And then we went to DARPA, which is this development and research, facility for the military, and they showed us all this crazy stuff that they're working on, or talked about it, from like the real Batmobile, which is like new lightweight armored vehicles with smart armor that like rotates around the thing, to drones, all this crazy stuff. And we were like, we came back and we were just sort of like, the fascinating thing is that everybody's thinking about the same thing, which is how does America stay what it's supposed to be and this big world player and be, a leader in terms of its communal aspects and collective aspects and still protect itself and all this. And so we were like, what if we do a book where we close the doors, which we had, that idea we had, but close the doors and use this stuff and just extend it into the future. So one idea was like, here's a peek. Like, so this expedition is invited into America after it's been closed for 30 years because a pandemic is happening around the world called the Sky virus, and it's killing everybody. And all of a sudden, these two governments that exist in the future get this message from America, and it's this guy who was part of this think tank, and he says, listen, America has become this shining city, this incredibly advanced place, and we have a cure for this pandemic, and we'll invite you in, but you have to follow our rules and fly on this vector and come to this place, this lab. And so they're like, okay. So they invite this team of people, and this team is the main characters, and they come in, and as soon as they're kind of over the wall and they're flying and they're shot down, and when they hit the ground, all of a sudden they see like robed people riding giant terrestrial fish monsters and stuff like that. And there's like no shining city whatsoever. And those fish monsters come from one of the things we heard about at DARPA, which are these bacteria-resistant fish that are designed in case there's a chemical weapon. So the point I'm trying to make, again, without looping too much around, is that I love the book because it's an argument against isolationism, not in a political way. It's not necessarily overtly about anything like immigration or whatever. I have strong feelings about those things, and I'm politically active in my life, and it touches on those, but it's not that. It's about the larger problem of the way in which we isolate ourselves from anything that challenges us, the same way we were saying about, Batman and that. I mean, last night and those things, where, the feeling that you could withdraw from everything and just insulate yourself in things that you just want to see and believe and not be challenged by the more systemic, entrenched issues in the world, regardless of where you fall on how to handle those things, is scary to me that my kids could do that. And so this book is very much an argument against the idea of isolating ourselves from each other. Not, one argument against another, but isolating ourselves from each other because it's going to take every different viewpoint, every different kind of, demographic to try and fix the things that are facing us right now. We're going to have to find a way not to be so divided and so entrenched in our positions to be able to approach problems that are looming and huge. So the book is personal, and yet it's also like Land of the Lost meets Lewis and Clark, where it's like the second zone, they go through these different zones. The country has been divided into these bizarre, almost like a spiral of different biomes, like 10 different biomes, and each one is like a snowy wasteland with mammoths, and one is like a super futuristic, I'm just ruining everything again, but like sci-fi 2001 kind of, redwood forest that's all white trees with these weird blue and red wires running through them. It's really fun. It's visually out of control. And Camo, the artist, is just doing great things with it. So I'm really proud of it. Again, it's one of those books that's like a golden egg idea where you're like, this is personal and matters to me, but it also allows for this giant Spielbergian, over-the-top, epic action and adventure. So it's that. It's not one of those books that's like, we don't want you to read it and feel like it's making any kind of argument. The only argument that's clear, I think, from the beginning is that alone, we're going to fail. Each of us alone, if we don't get together and find some form of collectivism, everything's going to go to hell. And that's kind of the book.
Do some questions?
Yeah, sure.
All right. Open it up for questions. Anybody have any?
So you have this knack for making things so big and topping that and topping that. So like, with Barbados and now with like Perpetua, do you ever get told no? Like, how do you come up with these big ideas? And if they're too big, does DC say no? Or like, what's the process for that?
He asked if I ever get told no because the ideas get bigger and bigger. Not really. Not any. I mean, like I used to get told no more. I mean, I got told no. I mean, yeah, I do get told no. What happens is like this. Like I'll pitch something like Metal. Metal was like a huge fight. Okay, because this is like talking off the cuff It's not like anyone's recording or anything, but like Metal, like I pitched Metal, and DC was receptive, but was also like, this is too, it's like too big and too out there at that time, and they wanted to break it into different events or wanted to call it different things and wanted to tone it down. And that's the moment when you have to really stand up for what you believe in and be willing to walk away if you don't think that what they're pitching you in return is going to be as good. So for me, I think I've made a career almost like, I think about Court of Owls, and this is again talking like way off the cuff. But with Court of Owls, the last issue, it was my first big thing, obviously. I'm not anybody like I am now, and not that I'm so big now, but now I have more leverage. Like, I have more sway. Do you know what I mean? Like, I could say, well, I'm going to do my own stuff, or I'm going to go to Marvel, or I'm going to, you know what I mean? Back then, I couldn't say that. The last issue of Court of Owls, there was an argument with people at Warner Brothers that Batman, not knowing the answer to whether or not Thomas Wayne Lincoln March was his brother would make him a worse detective. So the order came down at the last minute to say you should change it and make it so that he solves that case. And I had already written it, and it was out the door, and they were pulling it back from the printer to ask that, can you do that? And I remember like thinking about it at that moment, and a couple of my friends saying, this is like the moment if you say no and you refuse that, they're going to fire you. You know what I mean? Like, because you have to do that. It's Warner Brothers. It's not DC. It's not even your editor. And I said to them, you know, that's okay. You know, so I said, I remember fighting with them and saying, if you guys want to change the ending, that's okay. But then I want to go out and say I didn't write the ending, you know? And issue 12 is not by me. I didn't do it then. And they're like, well, you know, what are you going to do? And I'm like, I'm just going to say that. I'm just going to say that. You know, and not to be a dick. I just think that sometimes you have to be able to say, we agreed on this thing. This is what it's about for me. It matters to me. And if you change that, I can't deal with it. If you change any other like flexible things along the way, I can deal with it. But when it comes down to being told no initially, I'm very responsive. So if you say no to me, Court of Owls, you can't not solve something when I'm pitching it. I'll find another way to get to where I want. But if you agree to the story and then we're 11 issues in and then you decide no, then I'm not going to listen. Do you know what I mean? And the same thing with Metal. If you agree and then we're doing it and then you say we don't want to do it, that's when I'm going to be like, well, then that's when it gets like nuclear fight. So I try and operate that way. So like right now, for example, with some of the stuff I'm developing with DC, we're in the like nascent phase. So if they have ideas, if I have things I don't agree with, we just talk it through and, you know, we figure a solution. But once we agree on a solution, to me, and then once it's being written and drawn based on that agreement, that's when if they try and change something that's flexible, I'm like, yeah, no big deal if you want this character instead of that. But if it's something about the meaning of the story, then that's when I feel like you have to be willing to say, well, then I'm going to quit, or I'm going to, you know, or not. It's up to you, meaning whoever you are out there, being a writer or an artist. But I would just say that, you know, for me at least, that's been my compass in whatever way that makes sense. You know, like, if you're going to put basically this, my relationship is to you guys and the work, meaning I'm putting stuff out there because I want to connect with you and say, this story matters to me. It's about something that I stay up at night thinking about and I'm scared of or I'm hopeful about. If that meaning changes, there's no point in doing the story, and I'm breaking a trust with you, and I'm doing it for the money, and I'm doing bullshit. And if that's really what you're asking me to do, I'm not going to do it. And I'd rather go back and write books, or I'd rather go back and do my own stuff. Now I have other options. But even at that time, that's not what I'm going to do. Because you guys are going to stop having faith in me and say, why are we reading stories by this guy who clearly is, at the end of the story, that's such a lame ending. Batman solves the whole mystery and is like, that's not my brother. The end. Like, why would you want to read that Court of Owls? Like, that's lame. You know what I mean? So I'm just saying to you, that's where I feel like you have to draw a line for yourself, which is, where are you becoming somebody that you don't want to read? And when you become that person, you're in trouble. You know, that's where I've always been. And I feel like DC tolerated me when I look back and I'm like, how did they not fire me then? I'm baffled by that. I really am, where I'm like, I should have gotten fired a couple times early on, but they kept me. And now I feel like I try to be more sensitive about it, but I'm still the same, you know?
I saw some other hand, one back there, and then you.
A couple of years ago, it was reported that Plan B Productions had bought the film rights for Witches.
Mm-hmm.
Have you had any recent contact with Brad Pitt and Company as to adapting that? And second part of the question is when and what can we expect from Witches to return from their hiatus?
Yes, I have not had contact with Brad Pitt, to my wife's great dismay. He is still like her favorite, but I will say Plan B has been wonderful to us. Jeremy Kleiner and Sarah Esberg, before she moved over to Disney, were great. They actually involved us a lot, me and Jacques, in the screenplay and in the art direction and that stuff, and they created a script that was really good, that we like a lot. And so where it is right now is that they're looking to develop it from that script and make it into something. So that's where we are with them. They renewed their option. So we're very hopeful. But, you know, I was always like, oh, you buy it and then you make it and then it's there. And they were like, no, the runway for a film is usually 5 to 7 years, you know? So I was like, wait, what? I know. Sometimes not, you know, like Jurassic Park or whatever. But I'm just saying, you know, but where they are with it and how they've treated us has been great. I'm really happy with them. And they've been really involved. They helped, Jock did a lot of the art stuff and monster design. And so I'm hopeful. In terms of the series, Jock right now is doing a book. After Batman Who Laughs, our deal was that we go back and do Witches. And then the one thing I couldn't say no to for him was that he had a project with one of my best friends. I don't want to announce their project, so I'm not going to say what it is, but somebody I'm very, very close with, and they had decided to do something before we did Batman Who Laughs, and then he put that aside. So it's very short. It's like 4 to 5 issues, and he's working on it right now. And then once he's done with that, which will be in 3-4 months, we're going to go back to Witches. And the second arc is basically written. It takes place in the Southwest, and Sailor is 4 or 5 years older and works with Sebastian, who is the main character of Bad Egg, who's her mentor in the Irons. And essentially what happens is she's tasked with going to one of the oldest boroughs ever in New Orleans, and to go find some of the rooted witches and snuff them out. But before she does, she's kind of worried that her father might still be alive in one of the boroughs up north. So it's a lot. If the first series was about the terrors of being a parent, the second one is really about letting go of your parents, as you get older, letting go of your childhood, and being, you know, the terrors of becoming an adult in that way. So I'm very, very happy with it. Yeah.
You had mentioned you were saying, alluding to, I don't understand why they didn't fire me. So going back in time a little bit here, who were your mentors? Who were the people that were in your corner?
In my corner?
I mean, because
Yeah.
Somebody, I mean, you were mentioning, you know, people coach other people. It's all about networking and uplifting the next generation.
Yeah, that's a great question. I got to think I mean, like, do you know who's in your corner? I'll be honest with you. Like, I had good editors. I mean, Karen Berger was in my corner with American Vampire, as was Will Dennis, who's editing Witches and editing all my indie stuff right now. He's on retainer for me as my editor in my indie stuff. Mark Doyle, who does Last Night with me, but ultimately what I'd say is this: like, if you're interested in getting into comics, your real strength is with your collaborators. So Jock, when I wanted to work with Jock on Black Mirror, right, or when Greg and I were friends, I mean, I can give you a million examples of this, so I'm going to try and find the best one in my head. When we did issue 5 of Batman, when the book turned around, you know, that was the first time also. I had always written full script, and Greg was like, if you give me a little more room and write more outline, you know, I'll give you better stuff. And I was like, what are you talking about? This is all important stuff. And so, you know, he was like, well, just give me the important parts of the script. And I'm like, they're all important. What are you talking about? And we didn't get along at all at first. And when we hit issue 5 I was like, all right, this maze, this labyrinth, let me see what he does if I give him more room. And he came up with this idea to turn the book. And I was like, that's so smart and great. I got to give this guy way more room. And so he pitched it to DC, and then DC totally rejected it and was like, people are going to be confused. They're going to think that's a misprint, blah, blah, blah. And Greg wrote this like amazing impassioned email that was like quoting Steve Jobs and all this shit. No, seriously, it was like sometimes you dare to be a fool. I still remember, and I was like writing all these. I was like, ditto what he said, you know, like da da da. And I remember being like, because he told me, he's like, this is important. We need to do this, and I'm like, I'm with you, man. Like I'm with you. And they were like, you know. Because it was, again, the question of, like, are they going to fire you? And this is before Court of Owls took off. There was still some kind of wonkiness about, do people like us? Do they not like us? It wasn't cemented yet. And there was even criticism of Greg as going into issue 2, that he was too 90s, before they saw the art. And he made the cover to issue 2. If you look at issue 2, it's Batman on this motorcycle jumping this train. In the corner, there's a memorabilia store, and it said 90s memorabilia. And he did that he was like, that's the middle finger to all those people that think I'm from the 90s. Batman's jumping over that shit. And I was like, yeah. So I was like, I like this guy. And then, so with DC, when we both locked arms with the inker too and the colorist, FCO and John, and we were all like, we believe in this, or, you know, you got to listen to us or we're not going to do the book. Then they listened and let us do it, you know, and then now they're like, oh, it's great or whatever. The funniest part of that story, though, is that then we got the PDF for the book for 5, and I got it and I'm reading it and it's scrolling, and the book turns around and I'm like, God, they're such wimps. Like, look, it's so easy. Like, who's gonna think it's a misprint? It's fine. And then I got the print version in the mail, and I didn't realize you had to turn the book and read it backwards at a time. And I'm like, oh my God, there's a misprint in this book. And I swear, I was like, oh my God, there's a misprint. And then I finally realized it was what we had planned. So I wrote online, I was like, whatever you read in Batman 5 is deliberate. And then Greg called me within 30 seconds, and he's like, don't be an asshole, take that down. If they don't get it, they don't get it. And if they get it, they get it. And I'm like, fine. I'm like, delete tweet. And then literally, I swear to you, the same day, like an hour later, he got his comps, and he goes on Twitter and he's like, there's a goddamn misprint in Batman 5. And I called him and I was like, it's the same thing I was talking about, dude. And he's like, oh, sorry, delete. And it was so funny because we both were like, we saw it and we were like, oh man, they were right. This is like crazy, but we loved it. And we were like, oh, this. He was like, it's even better this way because, you know, but the point is, like, who's in your corner? You have good editors. Like, I had really good editors, but ultimately, you've got to have a creative vision you believe in. And if you don't lock arms with the team you're with, you're in trouble. You know what I mean? Like, you got to. Jock and me and Francesco were that way on Black Mirror. Greg and me and John and FCO were that way on Batman and Last Night. Justice League, I'm like that with Jorge and, you know, and James Tynan and all of that. Like, every book, Yannick helped me fight to keep Swamp Thing out of the book for a while with that. Like, you have to be a team. You got to be friends and creators first. So I'd say that.
All right. And then one final thing, I'll be greedy. So you're a big Elvis fan, right?
I am, yeah.
Woo! So I know you'll enjoy your time here in Memphis. When you were writing metal, were there any metal bands that you were listening to?
Oh, yeah. Well, Greg, I mean, I always like metal, but I like 80s metal. I was like, you know, Iron Maiden and all that stuff, like Evil Ernie and, like, you know, that whole like era and the whole art of it. And then Greg turned me on to like Gojira and Mastodon and all these bands now that were like, you know, I already had like, you know, Pantera and all that stuff then, but he was like all this great stuff now, even crazy stuff like Baby Metal and whatever. I was like, oh, it's great. So I was like, you know, just so yeah, the spirit of it is meant to be like, yes, it's metal, like it's heavy metal, but it's also meant to be like metal. To me, it's almost like the way I love horror, because I feel like horror is the purest form of conflict, where you're up against things that are like your greatest fears made material. It's the same thing as like a family drama. If like the family drama terrible, you know, emotional thing was a monster and was like, I am your inner conscience, you know, whatever. And so metal, to me, the idea of what metal is that same kind of thing, where it's like the most energized, angry, out of control, fun version of storytelling with this, and that's what it's meant to be. So yeah, there's a lot of metal bands that I love. I'm still a big, I'm a huge Elvis fan. Same thing though. It was like, I got into it when I was like 16, 17, growing up in New York City, where I was like, I'm going to like something nobody likes. I'm going to like this. And then I actually wound up really loving all of it. Him and Johnny Cash and Muddy Waters, Helen Wolf, and all the Sun Studio stuff and that. And so there's a good spirit of that as well in metal too. So, you know, I'm very, very excited for what we're planning, and I feel our heart's in the right place. I'm really proud of it. You know, I don't want to, we're not trying to bullshit you. Like, I'm not trying to do, I would tell you this, like, whether it's a big event or it's an indie book, I'm not going to do something to try and make money off you or whatever at this point in my career, you know. I honestly have a lot of reservations about a lot of that at this point, where it's more about just wanting badly to make my best stuff, wanting to make stuff that connects, that's about things that matter to me, and not caring about that. Because this is the truth. Like, the reason I was like, I don't care if I get fired, there was a period, and then I'll shut up, there was a period when I started on Batman where I was looking to get fired. That's the truth. I mean, I was like out of control. I mean, I was yelling at editors. I didn't care because the pressure was a lot, and I just didn't. I didn't want it. I didn't want to be this big success, like spotlight stage. You know, the barometer of how DC Comics was doing Batman is supposed to be so important. I wasn't asking for any of that. I just thought I was going to be a backup writer on Detective Comics at that point. So by the time it was 1 year in, and I was on Batman #1, and I was like imploding emotionally. You know, I was just like, I don't want this. Like. But all I cared about was, like, if I could just do a story that mattered to me, nothing else would matter. The pressure, I could block it all out. And now that I've come full circle, and I feel like I found a way to be more balanced about it after all these 10 years since then of doing things that I care about and seeing you guys respond, I feel like I don't have anything to lose anymore, where I can just do what I want in terms of making things that I care about and hoping that you'll follow. And saying, if you don't, that's okay too. You know, I respect the fact that something might not be for you, but I'm not trying to do things that get you in the door for money or for success or to stay where I am in the industry or any of that stuff. It's not that. It's trying to, I feel the next phase of my career, my hope is to make the best stuff. Like the best stuff I've done for DC. I feel last night's the best stuff Greg and I have done, but the next thing, the best stuff. Indie stuff, the best stuff. You know what I mean? Because I don't have anything to lose anymore with it. You know, whatever. My wife could go back to being a doctor. Do you know what I mean? No, she was always the one that was supposed to earn the living, and I was supposed to be like this writer tramp. And now, like she, you know, it's reversed where, you know, I'm just saying I'm not that I'm like, oh, go back to work. I just mean more like she loves what she does. She's brilliant. She does early detection breast cancer and pediatric cancer. But what I'm saying is that I don't care about being Scott Snyder. Do you know what I mean? I care about making things honestly. I know it sounds hokey, but it's the truth. Especially with a new baby. It's like trying to make things that matter to you personally, that you think are your best work, and make you the most exciting writer to yourself. Otherwise, there's no point.
Yeah. Well, thank you for coming. Thank you for coming to Memphis.
Oh, sure.
Thank you.
I feel like that was like a therapy session where I'm like on the couch.
We are here for you. If you want to come back next year.
I'd love to.
We'd love to have you back.
This has been amazing already, but yeah. Was that too? Was I just like talking my head off in the
That's
world?
what we came for. Everyone was happy about that.
Right.
We
Okay.
got inside your mind a little. We liked it.
I know. I feel like I should do more like rapid fire spoilers or something.
One more spoiler. Who's got it? What do you got?
Dark Multiverse, the first comic came out that was,
Yeah, Nightfall.
yes, are you writing all of those, or just writing the first one and multiple people write those?
No, I was just overseeing the first one. So the others are really let everybody else do it. What else? Like super rapid fire.
Another spoiler. Who wants one?
Who you're gonna write for Marvel? When you go to Marvel?
If I went to Marvel, I have a story. I have multiple ideas, but the biggest ones are for Cap. I have an idea for Captain America. I have one for Wolverine that I'd like to do with Greg, and then I have one for Hulk called Hulk Smash Everything, and it's all about like the origins of the bomb that made him and everything, and it's really big. So those are the three. I mean, I like Spider-Man too. I do Spider-Man, but Captain America, Ghost Rider, Wolverine are my 3 probably, and Hulk 4.
Just personally, as a Luke Cage fan, we need a good writer.
Oh.
You look like you wanted to say something.
I like to ask this question occasionally. You might have a good answer, it might be boring, but a lot of people write in, emails, letters, but occasionally you'll have somebody that will send a writer or an artist something in the mail. What's the strangest thing you've ever gotten in the mail?
Oh, in the mail?
Yeah.
Oh, the strangest thing I've ever gotten in the mail, I got a cutting board from somebody, I don't know how they got my address, that was cut out of wood, shaped like a bat. And it didn't really have any explanation as to who they were or whatever, but it was pretty awesome. It was just like a cutting board shaped like a bat.
That
was it. Anything else quick I can answer?
Questions.
Okay, so have you heard Mark Bernardin's version of what he would do with Court of Owls mixed with Batman Beyond at all?
No, but I love Batman Beyond.
What would you do if, for you, if they came to you like, hey, we want to use Court of Owls, like, as a version for a movie? Would you be involved in that anyway, or would they just take what you do? Or if they did, how would you feel about it?
Well, they have the right to take anything that I've made for DC and do whatever they want without my involvement. That's part of the contract with DC. You have equity in it, so I get paid for it. Like when they're on Gotham, I get paid for that. Or in a video game or anything they're in, you get paid, animated stuff. But you don't have any access to it creatively unless they invite you in. So I've sort of made my peace with the idea that anything they want to do, I'm excited to see translated into a new version. But if they asked me to be a part of it, which now there's a little bit more of that going on, I would love to do that. I mean, I'd love to be able to consult on video game or on a movie if they used any of our characters or our storylines. So it'd be a lot.
That's been a thing with the video game thing. People are thinking that the next game they're doing, the Arkham series, is going to be a Court of Owls type of idea. At least that's
I know.
That would be nice.
So,
That would be fun.
Know anything about that, by the way? Just wondering.
That's the real spoiler.
I don't know what I'm supposed to say or what I can't say. All I can say is, I would just say that Warner Brother Games have been really nice about involving me in the process of developing, inviting me out to California to look at some of the material for the game, and looked awesome. That's all I can say about it.
Was
You
it-
know what I mean?
Was it Rocksteady Studio still
No, it was
involved?
Warner Brothers Montreal.
Okay.
So it was,
yeah,
yeah.
they're the ones that make the Arkham games.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the last thing, as we close up, one of the local artists
Oh, nice. Stone
did
Ninja.
this. We wanted you to have that.
That's awesome. Nice. Stone Ninja. All about it. Sounds great. And listen, thank you guys so much. This kind of thing is what I really miss. Like I go to a lot of the bigger cons for DC and to promote the image books and that stuff, and they're fun, but they're not as personal. And to be able to get to talk to you guys, at the table, and to do this kind of panel where you can be a little bit more open and just answer questions more, more thoroughly means a lot. So I really appreciate you having me, and I hope to come back again soon. So thanks.
Thank you.